How did World War I finally end? The First World War had been raging for 4 years, with the Central Powers fighting against the Triple Entente. It had all started back in 1914, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand had met his demise at the hands of a Serbian nationalist in Sarajevo. This sparked a diplomatic crisis, which led to a cascade of events that resulted in most of Europe going to war within a month. The French, British, Russians, and eventually Japanese sided with the Antwerp, while the Germans, Austrians, Ottomans, and Bulgarians joined the Central cause. But by 1918, the tide was turning against the Central Powers. In this video, we're going to look at how World War I finally came to an end and why it was one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Make sure to stay tuned until the end of the video, where we'll find out just how much of a disaster the Treaty of Versailles was for Germany. And if you like this video and want to learn more about the Great War, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our full series on World War I starting next week. After the Battle of the Somme and the Battle of Verdun, the Western Front had devolved into a stalemate. The Germans had retreated to their Hindenburg Line, a series of heavily fortified defensive positions spanning over 200 miles across northern France. This line was designed by the brilliant German Field Marshal and engineer Erich Ludendorff. To successfully attack the well-defended line, the British and French needed to have complete air superiority. Without it, any attempt to break through would result in heavy casualties. And since neither side could gain enough of an advantage in the air to dominate the skies, the Allies resorted to bombing German cities and towns in an attempt to force the Germans to use up valuable resources defending their homeland. But the Germans were able to withstand the aerial onslaught and maintain the stalemate on the Western Front. However, things weren't looking so good on other fronts. In the east, the Russians had launched a massive offensive and advanced deep into German territory. They even managed to capture the city of Riga and advance all the way to the Baltic Sea, opening up a second front against the Germans. The Russian advance threatened to cut off East Prussia from the rest of Germany, dooming its 1 million German inhabitants. So German command ordered the Meuse-Argonne offensive to retake lost territory and open a new front in the west. Led by General von Franz, the Germans made significant gains in the Battle of the Meuse, pushing the Allies back across the river. But the offensive soon began to falter. The Germans were dangerously low on ammunition, and without replacements, their soldiers became exhausted and demoralized. And although the Germans had managed to relieve pressure on their eastern flank, they were still vulnerable to the threat posed by Russia. So they began fortifying the newly captured lands, quickly creating what would become known as the Siegfried Line. Meanwhile, the Allies regrouped and prepared for a counterattack. On September 26, 1918, the British and Americans launched the Meuse-Argonne offensive, advancing through the weakened German lines and pushing the Germans back. Over the next 2 months, the Allies continued to push forward, retaking lost territory until the Germans were forced to retreat back behind the Hindenburg Line. At this point, the Germans realized that they couldn't win the war and began to look for a way to end it. As peace talks were being arranged, the Russians made one last major offensive, capturing the city of Budapest and threatening to march on Vienna. With Russia now out of the war, the Germans knew that they could no longer hold out. On November 3, 1918, at 11 a.m., the guns along the Western Front fell silent. The fighting had ended. Germany was defeated, and the war was finally over. And although the armistice of November brought an end to the hostilities, it wasn't until June 28, 1919, that the Treaty of Versailles was signed, formally ending the war between Germany and the Allies. For the Germans, the treaty was extremely harsh, saddling them with the blame for the war, and forcing them to disarm, giving up territory, and pay large reparations to the Allies. Germany was furious, but they had no choice but to sign the treaty. After all, they were still occupying the enemy nations. Imagine if the Germans refused to sign the treaty. Well, the victorious Allies would have simply stayed occupied, refusing to leave until the treaty was signed. Now let's get back to our regularly scheduled programming. As the treaties were negotiated, the former Central Powers were occupied by the winning Allies, each nation given control over territories once belonging to their defeated enemies. The US occupied Austria, the British took control of Germany, and the French occupied the region of the Ruhr, among other territories. The troops of the victorious nations remained in place until the treaties were ratified, preventing any chance of a German counterattack or resurgence. In addition to disarming Germany and stationing troops in key areas, the Allies also imposed stiff penalties, requiring the Germans to hand over prisoners, return captured vessels, and demolish fortifications. These measures ensured that Germany was completely defenseless and unable to wage war for the foreseeable future. The Allied occupation of Germany after World War I is considered one of the most controversial topics in German history, and not without reason. For many Germans, the occupation represented the humiliation of defeat and the loss of national sovereignty. The presence of foreign troops on German soil was seen as a violation of German independence and a symbol of the country's subservience to its victors. Furthermore, the occupation brought with it a significant amount of hardship for the German people. The economic sanctions imposed by the Allies caused widespread poverty and unemployment, and the dismantling of Germany's military and industrial capacity left the country in ruins. The presence of thousands of foreign soldiers and administrators required significant resources to support, and there were often tensions between the occupying powers and the local population. However, it's important to recognize that the occupation was also necessary to ensure the security of Europe. Germany's aggressive actions during the war had caused immense destruction and instability on the continent, and it was clear that the country could not be trusted to maintain peace on its own. The occupation therefore served as a means of controlling Germany and preventing it from starting another war. Looking back, it's clear that the occupation had both positive and negative aspects. While it undoubtedly brought with it a great deal of hardship for the German people, it was also necessary to ensure the security of Europe. The occupation ultimately helped to prevent another devastating war on the continent for decades to come. The Treaty of Versailles is widely regarded as one of the most controversial and consequential documents in modern history. The treaty, which was signed on June 28, 1919, officially ended World War I, but its harsh terms and conditions have had a profound impact on the world we live in today. One of the most controversial aspects of the treaty was the allocation of blame for the war. The treaty placed the blame squarely on Germany, arguing that the war was solely responsible for Germany's actions. This was a controversial decision because it ignored the role that other countries played in the conflict. For example, many historians argue that the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which sparked the war, was also the fault of the Austrians and Russians who failed to contain the situation. Additionally, the treaty failed to take into account the complex web of alliances and interests that led to the war, such as the economic rivalry between Germany and Britain. Another controversial aspect of the treaty was the imposition of harsh penalties on Germany. The treaty required Germany to disarm, give up territory, and pay massive reparations to the victorious powers. These penalties were intended to punish Germany for its role in the war and to ensure that it would be unable to wage war in the future. However, they also caused immense suffering and economic hardship for the German people. The loss of territory, for example, resulted in the displacement of millions of Germans and the annexation of key German regions by neighboring countries. The economic burden of reparations, on the other hand, contributed to hyperinflation and widespread poverty in Germany. Finally, the treaty has been criticized for failing to address the underlying causes of the war. Many historians argue that the treaty did little to resolve the complex web of political, economic, and social issues that led to the conflict. Instead, it simply imposed a set of punitive measures on Germany and left the broader issues unaddressed. This failure contributed to the rise of extremism and instability in Europe in the interwar period, and ultimately helped to set the stage for World War II. In conclusion, the Treaty of Versailles is a deeply flawed document that has had a profound impact on the course of modern history. While it brought an end to World War I, its controversial provisions have been a source of debate and controversy ever since. By understanding the flaws and limitations of the treaty, we can better understand the challenges and complexities of international relations in the 20th century. Now check out another video on the deadliest battles of World War I, or click this other link